He fled Nazi Germany to survive. 3 years later, the United States Army sent him back, wearing an American uniform, speaking flawless German, sitting across a table from captured Nazi soldiers who had no idea the man interrogating them had once been exactly what they were trying to exterminate. They were called the Ritchie Boys, and they may be the most effective intelligence force most people have never heard of. In the 1930s, as Hitler's grip on Germany tightened, Jewish families across the country watched their lives disassemble in real time. Businesses seized, citizenship stripped away, neighbors who had known them for decades suddenly looking away on the street. For thousands of young Jewish men and their families, the choice became brutally simple: leave everything behind or risk everything by staying. Many of these young men left alone, boarding trains and ships toward America, not knowing if they would ever see their parents, siblings, or hometowns again. Some of them were right to wonder. They just didn't know it yet. America offered something Germany no longer would: safety. For many young Jewish refugees arriving in New York Harbor, it felt like the beginning of an entirely new life. What they didn't yet understand was that escaping persecution in one country did not mean escaping suspicion in another. As the war in Europe escalated, letters from home became less frequent. Then they stopped coming at all. Many of these young men would spend years not knowing the fate of the families they had left behind, carrying that uncertainty with them into every single day that followed. Then came an injustice almost too bitter to comprehend. Because these refugees were technically citizens of Germany, the United States government classified many of them as enemy aliens. Men who had fled the Nazis for their lives were now being treated by their adopted country as potential threats, simply because of where they were born. Some faced travel restrictions, curfews, confiscated radios and cameras. Many were stopped and questioned on the streets simply for speaking German in public, the very language the US Army would soon be desperate to recruit them for. The irony was almost unbearable. The accent that made them suspects at home was about to make them indispensable on the battlefield. In 1942, the US Army faced a critical problem. It needed soldiers who could think, speak, and understand the enemy from the inside. Native German speakers, people who understood German culture, German military structure, and German psychology better than anyone else in the American military possibly could. The army found exactly what it needed in the refugees it had spent the last several years treating with suspicion. They were sent to Camp Ritchie, a secluded military intelligence training facility tucked into the hills of western Maryland. Roughly 15,000 men trained there throughout the war, a significant number of them German and Austrian Jewish refugees who only months earlier had been treated as the enemy. Now, they were being trained to defeat one. Their training was unlike anything else in the American military. Instead of brute interrogation tactics, the Ritchie Boys were trained in psychology, how to build rapport, how to exploit a prisoner's fear, fatigue, and homesickness, how to extract critical intelligence not through force, but through conversation a captured German soldier never saw coming.
The army even built a fake German village inside the camp, complete with German signage and street layouts, so recruits could rehearse the exact world they were about to be dropped back into. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, Ritchie Boys landed on the beaches of Normandy alongside the first waves of American troops, not carrying heavy weapons, but notebooks, language skills, and an understanding of the enemy that no map or briefing could ever provide. Within hours, they were already interrogating captured German prisoners just yards from the fighting. This is where the Ritchie Boys' work truly began. Inside makeshift interrogation tents near the front, they sat across from frightened, exhausted German soldiers and spoke to them calmly, fluently, in their own native language. No threats, no violence, just a conversation no German prisoner expected to have with an American soldier. Some Ritchie Boys used a devastatingly simple psychological tactic. They would casually mention a specific street, a local bakery, a regional dialect detail from the prisoner's own hometown. The effect was immediate. A frightened German soldier expecting a hostile foreign enemy suddenly found himself talking to someone who somehow knew his world better than he expected any American ever could. The walls came down almost instantly. The intelligence gathered by Ritchie Boys is credited with playing a role in major Allied operations throughout the European campaign, from troop movements to enemy unit identification to advance warning of counterattacks. Historians estimate that the information they extracted contributed significantly to Allied intelligence efforts throughout the war in Europe. Men who had once been turned away with suspicion were now feeding the Allied war machine some of its most valuable information. As Allied forces pushed deeper into German territory, many Ritchie Boys found themselves crossing back into the country they had fled years earlier, not as refugees this time, but as American soldiers. For some, it was the first time setting foot on German soil since the day they left everything behind.
Some recognized streets from their own childhoods, now scarred by years of bombing and war. The towns they remembered were not the towns they found, and the country that had once tried to erase them now lay broken beneath the boots of the army they had joined to fight it. For some Ritchie Boys, the war's final months brought the answer to the question they had carried since the day they left home. What happened to the families they had said goodbye to years earlier? For too many, the answer was the worst one imaginable. When the war ended, the Ritchie Boys came home changed, carrying knowledge, grief, and an extraordinary chapter of military history that almost none of them were permitted to talk about. Their work remained classified for decades. Many lived ordinary American lives for the rest of the 20th century, never telling neighbors, co-workers, or even their own children exactly what they had done in the war. It would take decades, well into the 1990s and 2000s, for much of their work to be declassified and properly studied by historians. By then, many of the men who lived this story were already gone, their contributions buried in government archives far longer than they should have been. Today, historians widely regard the Ritchie Boys as one of the most effective and undervalued intelligence operations of the Second World War, not because of force, but because of empathy turned into strategy and pain turned into purpose. They were rejected, suspected, and underestimated by the very country they would go on to serve with extraordinary distinction. And in the end, the men who once feared losing everything became some of the very people who helped end the war that tried to destroy them. This is the story of the Ritchie Boys.